Under the frost-kissed moon, a single drop of blood traced the vein of the world, whispering secrets the stars dared not hear. Morel Dawn stood at the edge of the frozen ravine, her breath fracturing into silver ghosts against the relentless wind. The air bit like fangs, carrying the distant howl of wolves that echoed her isolation. At 27, she had known the pack's rhythms, the pulse of hunts under starlit skies, the communal warmth of fireside tales, but now, those memories curdled into betrayal's bitter aftertaste. Unmarked, unclaimed, she had always been the shadow among alphas and their chosen omegas, her scent a faint murmur that no one lingered to decipher. Yet it was that very invisibility that had sealed her fate. The Elder's circle loomed behind her, a ring of ancient stones etched with runes that glowed faintly under the lunar veil, their surfaces slick with rime. Snowflakes danced like fallen ash, settling on her cloak of weathered wool, heavy with the chill that seeped into her bones. Garrick Voss, the Alpha commander, had dragged her here himself, his grip iron on her arm. His eyes, those storm-gray depths she had once admired from afar, averted now, as if meeting her gaze would shatter his resolve. 35 winters had hardened him into a figure of unyielding steel, his broad frame clad in armor scarred by border skirmishes, the fur of his mantle dusted white. He believed in order, in the sacred laws that bound the pack through blood and oath. Sacrifice, he had said in the great hall, preserves the balance. Her name had fallen from his lips like a verdict, not a plea. Why? Morel had whispered then, her voice lost in the murmur of the assembled wolves, their eyes gleaming with a mix of pity and fear. The hall's torches had flickered, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the walls, illuminating the tapestries of ancient wars where alphas rose and omegas fell. Garrick had not answered, only tightened his jaw, the scent of his alpha presence, pine and iron, overwhelming, suffocating. Rumors had swirled for moons, whispers of unrest in the southern borders, visions of destruction foretold by the seers. An unmarked omega, they said, could be the vessel for chaos, a crack in the pack's foundation. Better to offer her to the Elder's judgment than risk the flames of prophecy. Now, as the wind whipped her dark hair across her face, Morel felt the weight of that judgment pressing down. The Elders encircled her, their robes whispering like dry leaves, faces hooded against the cold. Elder Thorn, the eldest among them, stepped forward, his staff tapping the snow with a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat slowing to stillness. "The moon bears witness," he intoned, his voice gravelly, laced with the spirituality of old rites. He drew a ceremonial blade from his belt, its edge catching the moonlight in a prismatic flash. "Blood for the balance, exile for the unmarked." Morel's heart thundered, a visceral drum against her ribs. She had no mate to claim her, no mark to prove her worth. Her omega nature was a quiet storm within, untapped, unacknowledged. The blade hovered, and she did not flinch. Fear had long since numbed her to such gestures. Instead, a deeper ache bloomed, the sting of Garrick's silence. He stood at the circle's periphery, arms crossed, his silhouette a monolith against the swirling snow. Had he ever seen her, truly? In the quiet hours of patrols, when their paths crossed in the frost-laden forests, had his gaze lingered with anything more than duty? The bond she had sensed once, faint as a dream, now twisted like a thorn in her chest, suppressed, perhaps, by his own iron will. The blade bit into her palm, a sharp bloom of pain that sent crimson threading through the snow at her feet. It seeped toward the runes on the nearest stone, the drops glistening like rubies under the moon's indifferent gaze. The elders chanted, low and resonant, invoking the goddess's mercy, but Morel felt no divine touch, only the cold seeping higher, claiming her fingers, her resolve. "Into the wilds," Thorn declared, his eyes narrowing as if peering into her soul. "Survive the night, or let the spirits claim what the pack discards." Garrick turned then, his boots crunching the ice as he strode away, the pack following in a somber procession. Their howls rose in farewell or warning, fading into the gale. Morel pressed her wounded hand to her chest, the blood warm against her skin, a stark contrast to the encroaching freeze. The ravine yawned before her, a chasm of jagged rocks and endless white, flanked by skeletal pines that clawed at the sky. Exile was no mere banishment. It was a death sentence wrapped in ritual, the wilds teeming with rival packs and beasts that scented weakness like blood in the wind. She stepped forward, the snow swallowing her footprints, each crunch a solitary echo. The moon hung low, a silver sentinel, its light fracturing on the icy expanse. In that moment, amid the howl of the storm and the throb of her wound, Morel wondered if strength lay in survival or surrender. The blood on her hand smeared, staining the fabric of her cloak, a mark of her own, unchosen, yet indelible. Far below, the ravine's depths whispered promises of oblivion, but she pressed on, the wind carrying her scent into the unknown, where prophecy slumbered, waiting for its awakening. The wind clawed at Morel's cloak like a living thing, tearing at the frayed edges as she descended into the ravine's shadowed throat. Hours had bled into the night since the elder's blade had kissed her palm, and the wound pulsed with a stubborn warmth, defying the frost that numbed her limbs. Snowdrifts piled against jagged boulders, their surfaces etched with ice that gleamed like forgotten blades under the moon's unyielding watch. She moved with the caution of one who knew the wild's treacheries, rival packs prowling the borders, their scents mingling with the metallic tang of blood from fresh kills. Her own blood trail, faint crimson streaks melting into white, marked her path like a reluctant confession, drawing her deeper into isolation. Exhaustion gnawed at her edges, but surrender was a luxury she could not afford. The pack's howls had long faded, replaced by the ravine's symphony. The low moan of wind through fissures, the distant crack of ice under unseen weight, and her own ragged breaths, each one a fragile thread against the cold. Morel paused at a narrow ledge, her fingers, stiff and blood-crusted, gripping a protruding root for balance. Below, the chasm narrowed into a frozen stream, its surface a treacherous mirror reflecting the moon's fractured face. She wondered if the goddess truly observed from those silver heights, or if the stars merely mocked the fallen. A sound shattered the silence, not the wind, but a guttural snarl, raw and human-edged, echoing from the mist-shrouded bend ahead. Morel froze, her heart slamming against her ribs like a caged beast. Fear coiled in her gut, instinctual and sharp, the omega within her recoiling from the promise of threat. She pressed against the rock face, the stone's chill seeping through her wool, and peered into the gloom. Shadows shifted, resolving into a figure staggering along the stream's bank. A man, broad-shouldered and armored, his steps faltering as if the earth itself rejected him. Garrick Voss. The sight of him struck like a thunderclap, disbelief warring with the ache that had festered since the great hall. He was no apparition of duty now, but a specter of ruin, his mantle torn, matted with dark stains that bloomed across his chest like accusations. Blood, his blood, dripped from a gash above his eye, carving rivulets down his weathered face, mixing with sweat and grime. His sword hung loose in his grip, the blade notched and dull, as if it had clashed against something unforgiving. He moved with the labored grace of a wounded predator, every breath a hiss through clenched teeth, his storm-gray eyes scanning the darkness with hunted intensity. What curse had befallen the Alpha Commander? Morel's mind reeled, curiosity flickering amid the terror that rooted her in place. He had cast her out, yet here he was, fleeing into the same exile, his iron resolve cracked by whatever shadow pursued him. The air thickened with his scent, pine and iron, now laced with the coppery bite of injury and something deeper, a wild desperation that tugged at her core. An instinctive pull, unbidden and fierce, stirred within her, the omega bond she had buried rising like mist from the stream. It whispered of connection, of shared blood under the moon. But she shoved it down, rationalizing it as survival's cruel jest. He was the betrayer. Trust was a blade turned inward. Garrick stumbled, his boots slipping on the ice, and he caught himself against a boulder with a muffled curse. The impact jarred a low groan from him, and for a heartbeat, his gaze locked onto hers, piercing, unguarded, as if the night had stripped away his armor's facade. Recognition dawned in those depths, a storm of emotions flashing, shock, guilt, and a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own hidden fractures. "You," he rasped, voice gravel rough, laced with pain. He straightened, wincing, but did not advance, his body coiled as if expecting attack. Blood from his wound pattered onto the snow, echoing her own earlier offering, a symbolic echo that hung between them like a thread of fate. Morel's pulse thundered, fear and curiosity twisting into a knot she could not untangle. Why was he here, wounded and alone? The pack's order, his sacred duty, had it crumbled so swiftly? She stepped back instinctively, her wounded hand throbbing in sympathy, the dried blood cracking like old earth. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, the word tasting of ash. "The wilds claim their own. What hunts you now?" He wiped blood from his eye, smearing it across his cheek, his expression a mask of conflicted shadows. "Traitors within," he muttered, the admission heavy, reluctant. "The borders, unrest. They struck in the hall's aftermath. Believing my judgment weakened the pack." His eyes flicked to her hand, to the crimson stain on her cloak, and something flickered there. Regret, perhaps, or the bond's insistent pull, denied by the walls he had built around his guilt. He took a step closer, not predatory, but seeking, the air between them charged with unspoken questions. The moon cast their silhouettes in silver, two exiles bound by betrayal's chain, the wind carrying their mingled scents into the night. Morel felt the connection ignite, instinctive and terrifying, a spark born not of warmth, but of the fear that they might both shatter alone. Yet she denied it, curiosity sharpening into wariness. Garrick Voss was no savior. He was the storm that had cast her adrift. Still, as distant howls rose, rival wolves or his pursuers, she could not tell, the wilds pressed in, demanding alliance or annihilation. The blood on the snow connected them, a reluctant bridge under the lunar gaze, where curiosity warred with the heart's guarded scars. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The howls sharpened, slicing through the ravine's veil like shards of obsidian. No longer distant echoes, but a chorus closing in. Morel's instincts flared, the omega within her coiling tight, urging flight even as the pull toward Garrick anchored her like roots in frozen soil. He tensed beside her, his bloodied hand tightening on his sword's hilt, the metal whispering against leather as he scanned the mist-choked bend. The air grew thick with the scent of intruders, musk and rage, laced with the acrid bite of betrayal from those who had once knelt at his command. Traitors, he had called them, and now their pursuit painted the night in strokes of imminent violence. "Run!" Garrick growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone at her back, but his body shifted, positioning itself between her and the encroaching shadows. It was not command, not quite, more a fractured offer, born of the guilt that etched lines deeper into his face. Morel met his gaze, storm-gray eyes reflecting the moon's cold fire, and saw the fracture there. The alpha commander, unyielding pillar of the pack, reduced to this haunted fugitive, his wounds a testament to the order he had shattered with her exile. She did not run. The wilds had taught her that flight only delayed the storm. Better to face it with something solid, even if that solidity was forged in pain. "Not without knowing why," she said, her words steady, though her pulse betrayed her, hammering like war drums in the silence between snarls. The bond stirred again, insidious and warm, threading through her veins like the blood that still seeped from her palm. A shared symbol, crimson and unyielding, binding their fates under the indifferent stars. The first attacker burst from the gloom, a beta warrior from the pack's fringes, his fur-mantled form low and feral, eyes gleaming with fanatic zeal. He lunged at Garrick, claws extended, but the commander met him with a savage pivot, his sword arcing in a silver blur that caught the moonlight. Steel clashed against bone, the impact reverberating up Morel's spine as she scrambled for cover behind a snow-laced boulder. The beta howled, a guttural cry that split the night, but Garrick pressed forward, driving the blade home with a precision born of endless battles. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic, staining the ice in a fleeting blossom before the cold claimed it. More shadows emerged, 3, then 4, silhouettes against the ravine's jagged walls, their breaths fogging the air like specters of the pack's unraveling. They circled, opportunistic scavengers sensing weakness in their former alpha, their chants low and mocking. The commander falls, the unmarked bleeds, the balance shifts. Morel's heart clenched. These were no strangers, but wolves she had shared hunts with, their faces twisted now by the poison of ambition. One broke from the pack, veering toward her, his snarl promising the elder's judgment amplified into savagery. Fear surged, but so did something fiercer, a spark of defiance ignited by the wound in her hand that throbbed in rhythm with the chaos. She snatched a loose shard of ice from the ground, its edge jagged as a makeshift dagger, and rose to meet him. The beta lunged, but Garrick was there in a blur, intercepting with a shoulder that slammed the attacker into the frozen stream. The ice cracked under the weight, a sharp fracture like breaking bone, and water, dark and churning, gurgled beneath. "Stay back!" Garrick barked at her, but his eyes flicked to hers, a plea hidden in the command, vulnerability cracking his armored resolve. Morel did not obey. Instead, she moved with him, her presence a quiet force amid the fray. As another traitor closed in, she swung the ice shard, catching his arm in a spray of blood that mirrored their own wounds. The beta recoiled, surprise widening his eyes, and Garrick finished the strike with lethal efficiency. Together, they fought, not as Alpha and Omega, but as two exiles forged in the same fire, their movements syncing in instinctive harmony. The bond hummed, no longer denied, but acknowledged in the heat of survival, his strength bolstering her resolve, her quiet ferocity easing the weight of his guilt. The last attacker fell with a gurgle, Garrick's blade buried in his chest, the snow around them a canvas of red and white, the metallic tang mingling with pine and frost. Panting, he slumped against the boulder, blood from his gash mingling with fresh cuts, his chest heaving as the adrenaline ebbed. Morel knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her cloak to press against the worst of his wounds. Her fingers brushed his skin, warm, fevered, and the contact sent a shiver through her, the bond's whisper turning to a murmur she could no longer ignore. Empathy bloomed unbidden, softening the edges of her anger. He was broken, as she was, his betrayal a scar etched by duty's cruel hand. "Why protect me now?" she asked, her voice soft against the wind's dying wail, the moon casting their forms in ethereal silver. The ravine seemed to hold its breath, the distant weavos fading into contemplative silence. Garrick's eyes met hers, raw and unguarded, the storm within them calming to a somber sea. "Because the choice was mine, and it haunts me," he confessed, his hand covering hers on the makeshift bandage, the touch lingering like a vow unspoken. "I thought sacrifice preserved us, but seeing you here, it reveals the lie. The pack's order crumbles without mercy." His words hung heavy, laced with the melancholy of a king dethroned by his own hand, the blood on the snow a testament to their shared refuge, not in stone walls, but in the fragile trust forging between them. Morel felt the shift, empathy weaving into something deeper, a bond resisted yet inevitable, born not of romance's fleeting spark, but of pain's alchemical forge. The wilds pressed close, but for the first time since the Elder's circle, she was not alone. The moon watched, its light a benediction on their wounds, as the night deepened into uneasy peace. The moon's silver gaze pierced the ravine's canopy, illuminating the makeshift shelter where Morel and Garrick had collapsed. A shallow cave mouth framed by icicle teeth, its walls veined with frost that wept in rhythmic drips. The air inside hung heavy with the scent of blood and pine, a metallic undercurrent mingling with the damp earth that cradled their weary forms. Morel's hands trembled as she rebound his wounds, the strip of cloak now a sodden crimson rag. Her own palms cut reopened in the fray, seeping fresh warmth against the unrelenting cold. The bond between them pulsed like a hidden vein, no longer a whisper, but a steady thrum, drawing her closer despite the walls of wariness she had built. Garrick leaned against the stone, his broad chest rising and falling in labored cadence, the fire she had kindled from scavenged tinder casting flickering shadows across his scarred features. Flames danced low, their orange glow warring with the blue-tinged moonlight that filtered through the entrance, painting his storm-gray eyes in hues of regret and resolve. He watched her in silence, the weight of his confession lingering like smoke. His earlier words, "The choice was mine, and it haunts me." A bridge extended across the chasm of betrayal. Yet Morel felt the fracture still, the omega within her yearning, even as her mind recoiled, rationalizing the pull as the wild's cruel illusion, born of shared peril rather than truth. "Why me?" she murmured, her voice a thread in the cave's hush as she tied off the bandage. The fire crackled, spitting embers that mirrored the spark in her chest, curiosity laced with the ache of unspoken wounds. Outside, the wind howled its nocturnal lament, carrying faint weavos that spoke of the pack's distant turmoil, a reminder that their refuge was fleeting, a breath held against the storm of civil unrest brewing in the shadows of the Elder's hall. Garrick's hand caught hers gently, his touch roughened by battle, yet tender in its hesitation, the contact sending a shiver through her like wind over fresh snow. "Because you were unmarked," he said, his tone low and etched with melancholy, the Alpha's ethical core laid bare in the firelight. The seers spoke of chaos, an omega vessel for destruction, a crack in our oaths. I believed order demanded sacrifice, that my duty to the pack outweighed. This. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, the bond's insistent warmth threading between them, suppressed no longer, but acknowledged in the raw vulnerability of his admission. Guilt shadowed his features, a king dethroned by his own hand, his 35 winters heavy with the burden of choices that had splintered his world. Morel pulled away, not harshly, but with the quiet resistance of one who had learned to guard her fractures. She rose, pacing the cave's confines, her boots whispering over the frost-dusted floor. The wound in her palm throbbed, a persistent heat that defied the chill, drawing her eye to the cave wall where faint etchings gleamed. Ancient runes, half buried under layers of ice, their curves reminiscent of the Elder's stones, yet wilder, untamed by ritual. She traced one with her fingertip, the stone cool and unyielding, but as her blood-smeared skin brushed it, a spark ignited. Not pain, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through her bones, echoing the moon's distant call. The air thickened, charged with an otherworldly hush, the fire's flames leaping higher as if fed by invisible breath. Morel gasped, her vision blurring at the edges, the Omega's hidden depths stirring like a storm awakening beneath still waters. Colors intensified. The runes glowed with an inner fire, crimson veins pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, spreading across the wall like roots seeking light. Blood from her palm dripped onto the stone, each drop sizzling faintly. igniting the carvings in a cascade of luminous red that bathed the cave in ethereal scarlet. Symbols unfurled, spirals of prophecy, depictions of a balancing scale between flame and frost, an omega figure crowned by lunar horns, her form radiating mercy's quiet power. Garrick surged to his feet, wincing but transfixed, his eyes widening as the revelation unfolded. The Omega of prophecy, he breathed, the words a reverence laced with awe and dawning horror, his voice cracking the silence like ice under pressure. He stepped closer, the firelight gilding his armor's edges, but he did not touch her. Instinct held him back, recognizing the sacred boundary now breached. The runes pulsed brighter, whispering in the language of the goddess. Visions flooded Morel's mind. Fragments of destiny, a pack torn by war, borders aflame with rival Alpha's greed, and she at the center, not as victim but as fulcrum, her blood the key to mercy or ruin. The Dhamma Kulto, long dormant, manifested in waves of spiritual clarity, her senses sharpening to the cave's every nuance, the metallic tang of their wounds, the wind's mournful sigh, the bond's golden thread weaving tighter, revealing Garrick's suppressed truth. He had felt it, moons ago, in stolen glances during patrols, but duty had chained it, fearing it would unravel the pack's fragile order. Tears traced her cheeks, cold against the heat blooming in her core, the weight of prophecy crashing like a glacial wave. It's not a gift, she whispered, her voice trembling with the visceral truth of it, the cave's walls now alive with glowing testimony. It's a chain, forged in blood and lies. You betrayed me to preserve your throne, yet here I stand, the balance you feared. Empathy warred with resentment, the romantic tragedy of their connection deepening in the lunar glow, the tenderness born not of ease, but of this painful unveiling, where his guilt mirrored her awakening. Garrick knelt then, not in submission, but in ethical surrender, his hand hovering near hers, the Alpha's melancholy etched in every line of his frame. I see it now, he confessed, his storm-gray eyes locking onto the rune's crimson dance, then to her face, raw with the realization that she was no mere exile, but the living prophecy, the key to redemption he had nearly extinguished. You are the mercy I denied, the proof that strength lies not in order's blade, but in choosing truth over fear. Forgive me, Morel, or let this bond break us both. The words hung, a moral precipice under the moon's watchful eye, the cave a temple of revelation where destiny revealed its dual edge, salvation or sorrow. Morel felt the pull intensify, the blood on the runes cooling to a steady glow, a symbol of her rebirth, not as the unmarked shadow, but as the Omega who could tip the scales. The wind outside softened, as if the goddess herself paused, awaiting her heart's verdict amid the fire's dying embers and the night's profound silence. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The ravine's shadows deepened into twilight's bruise as dawn's first pallor clawed at the horizon. But the cave's crimson glow lingered like a wound that refused to close. Morel stood transfixed before the runes, their luminous veins now pulsing in sync with her breath, each throb a reminder of the prophecy's unyielding claim. The air hummed with residual magic, thick and electric, carrying the faint scent of scorched stone and her own blood, warm, insistent, the symbol that had unlocked this truth. Garrick remained knelt, his form a silhouette of humbled steel, the fire's embers casting erratic flickers across his face, etching deeper the lines of guilt that had haunted him since the Elder's circle. His confession echoed in the confined space, a raw plea that tugged at the bond's golden thread, weaving empathy through her resentment like roots through frozen earth. Yet peace was an illusion, shattered by the thunder of approaching paws. Hoofbeats? No. The heavy tread of armored wolves, their howls rising in a war cry that vibrated the cave walls. The pack had come, not in ritual, but in reckoning, drawn by the rune's awakening or the traitor's final gasps. Morel's heart seized, the Omega's instinct flooding her with visions. The great hall aflame, elders fallen, and a rival alpha, Cale Thorn, Garrick's shadowed counterpart from the southern borders, seizing the throne amid the chaos he had sown. Cale, with his eyes like polished obsidian and ambitions sharper than any blade, had whispered poisons into the pack's ears, framing Garrick's weakness as the harbinger of doom. The betrayal Morel had endured was but the spark. Now, civil war's inferno raged, threatening to consume the frozen wilds in blood and frost. Garrick rose swiftly, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, the metal singing free from its sheath. "They've come for us both," he murmured, his voice a gravelly anchor amid the encroaching roar, storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with a fierce protectiveness that belied his inner fracture. The bond surged, no longer a murmur but a torrent, flooding her senses with his turmoil, the ethical king torn between duty's chains and the mercy she embodied. Morel felt it viscerally, the warmth of his resolve clashing with her awakening power, her blood's heat contrasting the cave's chill, urging her toward a choice that could either bind or break them. She stepped forward, the rune's glow fading to a soft ember on her skin, marking her palm like a crown of scars. "Then we face them," she said, her words steady despite the storm in her chest, the prophecy's weight pressing like the wind's unyielding fist. Rationalization flickered. Freedom meant fleeing into the wilds alone, shedding the pack's shadows and his guilt-tainted bond. But the pull resisted, born of the revelation's truth. Love as redemption, not a prize, demanded confrontation, not escape. They emerged into the ravine's maw, the morning light fracturing on the snow like shattered glass, illuminating a phalanx of wolves at the ledge above. Torches blazed in their grips, flames devouring the cold in hungry bursts, casting the assembly in stark relief. Loyalists mingled with Cale's insurgents, their faces a mosaic of fear, fury, and fanaticism. At the forefront stood Cale, his lithe frame clad in black-furred armor etched with rival runes, symbols of conquest, not balance, his obsidian eyes gleaming with triumphant malice. Beside him, Elderthorn, coerced or complicit, clutched his staff, its tip bloodied from the hall's skirmishes. The pack's howls crescendoed, a cacophony of bloodlust and betrayal. The air thick with the metallic tang of fresh violence carried on the wind. "Traitor commander!" Kyle bellowed, his voice slicing through the gale like a whip, echoing off the icy walls. He gestured to Morel, his lip curling in disdain. "And the unmarked whore you spared. The seers were right. Your weakness invites ruin. The Omega of prophecy? A lie to cloak your cowardice. Step aside, Voss, or we'll carve the truth from your flesh." His followers snarled in agreement, claws scraping stone, the torchlight gilding their bared fangs in infernal gold. The ravine seemed to contract, the wind whipping snow into blinding veils, amplifying the sensory assault. The crunch of boots on ice, the ragged breaths of the encircled, the distant weavos of beasts scenting the impending slaughter. Garrick positioned himself before her, his stance unyielding, sword raised in a guard that spoke of battles won and oaths unbroken. "You twist the goddess's will for your crown, Cale," he retorted, his tone laced with the melancholy of a leader betrayed by his own. "Morel's blood has awakened the runes, proof that mercy, not your wars, balances us. I betrayed her once, fearing chaos. No more." His gaze flicked back to her, a silent entreaty, the bond conveying his ethical core. Forgiveness as the path to redemption, war as the chain he refused to forge anew. Morel's pulse thundered, the prophecy manifesting in a visceral rush, her vision sharpening to the pack's fractures, sensing the loyalists' wavering hearts, the insurgents' greed like a foul odor on the breeze. The choice loomed, moral and searing. Invoke her power to unleash mercy's wave, forgiving Garrick's fear-driven act and binding the pack through compassion, or embrace freedom's blade, rejecting the bond and the hierarchy that had scarred her, letting war's fire purge the lies. Love or liberty, pardon or perdition, the dilemma clawed at her soul, the blood on her palm warming as if the moon itself urged her forward. Cale laughed, a hollow bark that dissolved into the wind and lunged down the slope, his blade flashing in an arc of lethal intent. The pack surged, a tide of fur and steel crashing toward them, torches hissing in the snow. Garrick met the first clash with a roar, his sword meeting Kyle's in a shower of sparks that lit the frost like falling stars. Morel moved not in retreat, but resolve, her hand outstretched, the runes on her skin igniting anew. A pulse emanated from her blood, rippling through the air, a spiritual shockwave that halted the onslaught mid-stride, wolves stumbling as visions assailed them, the pack's unity under lunar grace, or its dissolution in rivers of crimson. Elderthorn gasped, dropping to his knees, the staff clattering. The balance. She is the vessel. Whispers spread, fracturing Cale's ranks, but the rival Alpha pressed on, his eyes wild with denial. Illusion! He snarled, striking at Garrick with renewed fury, their blades locking in a visceral dance of sweat and strain, blood spraying to mingle with the snow, red on white, a poetic indictment. Morel's heart fractured under the weight, tears freezing on her lashes as she locked eyes with Garrick across the fray. His face, blood-streaked and fierce, held no command, only the raw plea of a man seeking absolution through her choice. Forgiveness meant chaining herself to the pack's fate, to him, transcending betrayal in redemption's forge. War meant liberty's cold embrace, but at the cost of souls shattered like the ice beneath their feet. The wind howled its judgment, the moon's fading light a spectral witness, as the ravine trembled with the precipice of her decision, love as proof, not reward, demanding she choose between the heart's quiet fire and the storm's unforgiving freedom. The pack's fate hung in that suspended breath, blood and snow bearing witness to the ethical tempest within her, where compassion's whisper warred with the roar of justified wrath. The ravine's fury peaked in a whirlwind of steel and snow, the clash of blades ringing like the goddess's fractured lament, each strike a visceral echo of the choices carving deeper into Morel's soul. Blood arced through the air, warm droplets scattering like crimson petals against the unrelenting white, mingling with the frost that bit at her exposed skin. The wind howled its impartial dirge, carrying the metallic tang of wounds and the acrid smoke from dying torches, while the fading moon cast elongated shadows that danced like specters across the fray. Morel stood at the epicenter, her outstretched hand trembling, the runes on her palm glowing with an inner fire that pulsed in time with her racing heart, a living sigil of the prophecy she could no longer deny. Cale's assault pressed Garrick back, their swords locking in a grinding symphony of hatred, sparks flying to illuminate the rival Alpha's twisted snarl. Sweat beaded on Garrick's brow, freezing into jagged crystals that traced paths down his bloodied cheek, his storm-gray eyes flickering with the raw determination of a man fighting not just for survival, but for the redemption he glimpsed in her. The bond thrummed between them, a golden vein threading through the chaos, conveying his unspoken vow. He would shield her choice, even if it meant his end. Morel felt it acutely, the warmth of his ethical core clashing against her inner tempest, urging her toward union, even as resentment clawed at the edges, whispering that forgiveness would chain her to the very hierarchy that had scarred her. Around them, the pack fractured further, loyalists turning on Cale's insurgents in a maelstrom of fur and fangs, howls rising in confusion and rage. Elder Thorn, risen from his knees, raised his staff with a cry that cut through the din. The Omega speaks, mercy or madness, witness her will. But Cale laughed through gritted teeth, shoving Garrick against a boulder with brutal force. the impact jarring a grunt from the commander as fresh blood welled from his side. "Your vessel is a fraud," Kyle spat, his obsidian eyes locking onto Morel, gleaming with the fanatic gleam of one who saw only power, not balance. "I'll spill her blood myself and claim the throne the goddess denies." He broke free, lunging toward her, blade raised high, the torchlight gilding its edge in hellish red. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the arc of that descending steel, the wind's roar fading to a hush broken only by the thud of her pulse. Morel's vision sharpened, the prophecy's gift unfurling like roots in fertile soil. She saw the threads of fate weaving through the pack, Kale's greed a black vein poisoning the whole, Garrick's guilt a wound that could heal if cauterized by truth, her own power a bridge between destruction's blaze and mercy's quiet frost. The blood on her palm burned hotter, summoning a surge from deep within, not sorcery, but essence. The Omega's hidden strength, born of rejection's forge, manifesting as a radiant wave that rippled outward. It struck Kale mid-stride, halting him as if invisible chains bound his limbs, his eyes widening in shock as visions assailed him. The pack's dissolution in endless war, borders crumbling under rival claws, his crown dissolving into ash under the moon's judgment. He staggered, blade clattering to the snow, and collapsed to one knee, gasping as the spiritual force peeled back his ambitions like frost from a window pane. The insurgents faltered, their snarls turning to whimpers, the air thick with the scent of fierce sweat and thawing ice. Morel advanced, her steps measured, the runes casting a scarlet halo around her form, illuminating the ravine's jagged beauty in hues of red and silver. The cold no longer pierced her. Instead, a profound warmth bloomed, the bond with Garrick amplifying it, drawing his strength into hers like rivers converging. Yet the dilemma clawed deeper. This power was no salvation without cost. To wield it fully meant embracing the prophecy's chain, forgiving Garrick's betrayal, binding herself to him and the pack in a union that transcended hierarchy, or severing it all, letting Kale's defeat ignite war's full fury and claiming her freedom in solitude's icy embrace. Garrick surged forward, disarming Kale with a swift strike that sent the rival Alpha sprawling, his sword pinning the traitor's cloak to the bloodied snow. Panting, he turned to her, his chest heaving, wounds weeping crimson trails that soaked his armor. But his gaze held steady, melancholy softened by awe, the Alpha's broken nobility laid bare. "Morel," he rasped, voice raw over the wind's subsiding wail. "The choice is yours. I betrayed you for Order's illusion, suppressing what my soul knew. If mercy crowns me, let it be through you, not as duty, but as the redemption I don't deserve." His hand extended, palm up, scarred and trembling, an offering of vulnerability that mirrored her own awakening scar, the blood between them a symbolic pact under the dawn's creeping light. Tears blurred her sight, hot against the chill as the pack fell silent, circling closer with bated breath, their eyes reflecting the rune's dying glow. Thorn nodded solemnly, the elders' chants resuming in low harmony, invoking the goddess's witness. Morel felt the weight of it all, the philosophical precipice where power met compassion, where love proved itself not in passion's fire, but in the quiet act of choosing mercy over vengeance. Freedom tempted, a siren's call to vanish into the wilds, unmarked no more but unbound. Her prophecy a personal flame rather than the pack's salvation. Yet the bond resisted, its warmth a counterpoint to the ravine's cold, revealing Garrick's truth. His guilt had been fear's mask, his ethical heart always aligned with the balance she now embodied. She reached for his hand, their blood-smeared palms clasping in a union that sent a shiver through the air, the runes flaring one final time before fading to embers. "Forgiveness is no chain," she whispered, her voice carrying like wind over the snow, resonant with the spiritual clarity of rebirth. "It's the choice that heals. We stand together, not as Alpha and Omega of old, but as equals in the goddess's design. The words ignited something profound, a wave of empathy rippling through the pack, Kyle's defeated form slumping as loyalists dragged him away, the threat of civil war dissolving like mist under the rising sun. But the Renacimento was not complete. Shadows lingered in the ravine's depths, whispers of unresolved oaths and the pack's fractured trust. Morel leaned into Garrick, their foreheads touching, the scent of pine and blood enveloping her like a cloak, the bond sealing in quiet tenderness born of tragedy. The moon surrendered to dawn, its light fracturing on the melting snow, but the true dawn lay in her heart's verdict, a sacrifice of solitude for union's promise, where redemption proved love's unyielding proof. Yet as the pack gathered, eyes alight with newfound faith, Morel sensed the final trial approaching. To fully heal the wounds, they must return to the Great Hall, confronting the Elder's judgment and the prophecy's ultimate demand. The wind sighed its approval, carrying the distant Huevos into harmony as the ravine bore witness to their fragile rebirth, blood and frost forging a path toward wholeness, or its perilous cost. The dawn's reluctant light bled across the ravine's scarred expanse, turning the bloodied snow into a mosaic of rose and silver, where the echoes of battle lingered like ghosts in the thinning mist. Morel's hand remained clasped in Garrick's, their palms sealed by the cooling residue of her runes, a crimson bond that pulsed faintly, a living testament to the choice she had forged in the heart of chaos. The pack encircled them, their forms a ragged tapestry of fur-mantled warriors and elders, breaths fogging the air in collective awe. The wind's howl softened to a whisper, as if the wilds themselves deferred to this fragile equilibrium. Cale's bound figure was dragged away by loyalists, his obsidian eyes dimmed to defeat, the rival's ambitions crumbling like frost under the sun's first touch. Yet victory tasted of ash. The prophecy's awakening demanded more than survival. It craved the ultimate Renacimento, a return to the great hall where betrayal had begun, to heal the fractures with truth's unyielding fire. Morel felt the weight of it in her bones, the Omega's essence now a steady flame within, warmed by the bond that thrummed between her and Garrick like the earth's hidden rivers. His touch grounded her, rough and reassuring, the scent of pine and iron mingling with the metallic tang of their shared wounds, a sensory anchor amid the philosophical tide. Forgiveness had not erased the scars. Her exile's chill still lingered in her veins, his guilt a shadow in his storm-gray gaze. But it had transmuted them, alchemizing pain into purpose. Love, she understood now, was no ethereal reward, but redemption's proof, a deliberate act of mercy that bound without chaining, healed without erasing the cost. As the pack formed ranks behind them, torches reignited to pierce the gathering gloom. She led the ascent from the ravine, Garrick at her side, their steps synchronized in the snow's crisp hush, each crunch a vow etched into the frost. The journey back wound through skeletal pines that clawed at the paling sky, their branches heavy with rime that shattered like glass under the wind's sigh. Distant Huevos rose in tentative harmony, the wild's beasts sensing the shift, a pack reborn, not through conquest's blade, but compassion's quiet forge. Morel's palm ached with a profound warmth, the blood symbol recurring in every heartbeat, reminding her of the sacrifice ahead, to confront the elders not as the unmarked outcast, but as the Omega of prophecy, demanding they witness the bond Garrick had suppressed, the truth that order without mercy was but a throne of ice. Garrick walked in silence, his broad frame leaning subtly toward her, the melancholy of his 35 winters softened by the ethical clarity she had ignited. "This path leads to judgment anew," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against the wind, laced with the vulnerability of one who had knelt before her light. "If my confession breaks us further, know it mends what I shattered." She met his eyes, the depths reflecting the dawn's gold on snow, and nodded, the bond conveying her resolve without words, a tenderness born of tragedy, visceral and unhurried. The great hall loomed as they crested the final ridge, its stone walls etched with runes that flickered faintly, as if awakening to her presence. Torches blazed along the battlements, their flames devouring the cold in bursts of orange and shadow, illuminating the assembled wolves who parted like a tide before them. Whispers rippled through the throng, the commander's return, the Omega's glow, the rivals' fall. Elder Thorn stood at the threshold, his hooded form silhouetted against the hall's maw, staff gripped white-knuckled, the weight of complicity etching his ancient face. Inside, the air thickened with the scent of smoldering hearths and lingering blood from the night's skirmishes. Kale's insurgents purged, but the hall's tapestries torn, symbols of ancient wars staring down like accusatory eyes. The elders formed their circle once more, robes whispering like dry leaves, but now the runes on the central stone pulsed with her blood's echo, drawn from memory or magic, casting the chamber in a scarlet veil. Morel stepped forward, releasing Garrick's hand to approach the stone, her cloak falling open to reveal the faint scars on her arms, marks of exile's trials, now badges of rebirth. The pack gathered, a sea of gray fur and steel, their breaths a collective hush broken only by the fire's crackle and the wind's moan through arrow slits. "I stand not as sacrifice," Morel declared, her voice resonant, carrying the lunar spirituality that had bloomed within her, each word a philosophical anchor amid the tension. She pressed her palm to the stone, the runes igniting anew in a cascade of crimson light that bathed the hall, visions unfurling for all, the ravine's battle, Kyle's greed exposed, Garrick's blade stayed by her mercy. Gasps echoed, the elders recoiling as the prophecy revealed its fulcrum, her as the balance, blood the key to mercy over destruction. "But as the vessel you feared, Garrick betrayed me, believing my unmarked nature a threat to your order. Yet in suppressing our bond, he chained us all to fear's illusion." Garrick moved to her side, his armor scarred and bloodied, kneeling before the circle with the gravity of a king yielding his crown. "I confess it here, under the goddess's gaze," he said, his tone etched with melancholy and unfeigned remorse, the Alpha's ethical heart laid bare. "The bond stirred moons ago, in the forest's quiet, but duty blinded me. Morel's exile was my sin, born of guilt over what I could not claim. No longer. She is the prophecy's heart, mercy incarnate, and I bind myself to her, not as commander, but as equal, if she wills it." His eyes sought hers, raw with the plea of redemption sought, not demanded, the bond's warmth a bridge across the hall's charged silence. The elders murmured, Thorn's staff tapping like a heartbeat, but Morel felt the pack's shift, empathy rippling like wind over snow, the philosophical truth sinking in. Strength was choosing compassion over power, faith over despair. She extended her hand to Garrick, drawing him to stand, their union a quiet ceremony under the rune's dying glow. "The chain breaks with forgiveness," she whispered to him, then louder to the assembly, "and reforms as choice. We heal together, not in hierarchy's shadow, but in the light of rebirth." The hall erupted in howls of affirmation, a chorus that shook the stones, the fire leaping higher as if the goddess approved, blood and flame entwining in symbolic harmony. Yet the Renacimento demanded one final sacrifice. Morel turned to Thorn, her gaze unyielding. "The old laws crumble. No more exiles for the unmarked. Prophecy teaches balance through unity." The elder bowed, the circle parting, and as the pack pressed forward in vows of loyalty, Morel leaned into Garrick, their foreheads touching amid the warmth of communal fires. The bond sealed fully, a profound union born of suffering's forge. Love as proof, transcending betrayal in tender, visceral grace. The wind outside softened to a sigh, carrying the moon's farewell into the dawn, where rejection yielded to destiny's embrace, the wilds forever changed by mercy's crown. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.